All right, so in a little bit I'm going to ask you to kind of fill in this chart, but just put down your pencils or pens and kind of listen for a little bit. I'm just going to talk through a couple points and then I'll give you some time to get it filled in. So this is Learning Target 1 and Learning Target 2. I just forgot to copy it in there. You should see it on your note sheet. Learning Target 1 is purposes, limitations, and differences among the different types of studies that we're going to define. And then also you're going to need to be able to design your own survey experiment or observational study to test a hypothesis. Learning Target 2 is about comparing and contrasting population parameters and sample statistics, causation, association to treatments, all that kind of stuff. We'll get to that. We'll talk a little bit about some of that Learning Target 2 today. So anecdotal studies are not recommended. These are studies in which data is collected in a way that's just convenient to the investigator. So it's going to be a really quick poll, and it's going to be done really conveniently, and it's probably not going to be very reliable. Okay, recommended are one of these three methods here. We've got experimental. That's when treatments or assignments are applied to subjects by the researcher. Observational is when treatments are applied by the researcher or are not applied by the researcher. Subjects may know they're being observed, but they don't know what they're actually being observed on. And then survey, you've probably been surveyed before, or you had made your own survey before. This is when information about the treatments and or results are collected. So we've got some examples here. So an example of experimental is students volunteer to help, and then they're randomly assigned to one of the two groups. On the day of the exam, for example, let's say we're talking about trying to decide about the test results of a student if lunch kind of affects that. So group 1 eats hot lunch, group 2 eats cold lunch, and then you see what happens. An observational example would just mean that basically you take a number of subjects, you observe them at lunch, you collect information about the kind of lunch they eat, and then they're classified into groups based on how they do on their test. And then a survey questionnaire is given to all the class asking what kind of lunch they had, and then you can compare that to their test results. So you need to define a number of things. I'll just have you write those down, but this will kind of be a checklist for you as you're creating your own of each kind of study. These will be kind of checklists for what you need to define to be able to make a survey, observational, or experimental study. And then real quick, causation versus association. So you have to be very careful if you're going to say that one thing causes another. So for example, eating hot lunch causes you to do better on a test. Causation can really only be proven using a true experimental design, and even then it's kind of difficult to prove causation. Otherwise we just call it association. So there's an association between these two things. We notice that there seems to be an association when one thing goes up, the other goes up, or when one thing goes down, the other goes down. The only time you can really use causation with an observational study is if it's really, really big study and it's over a long period of time. And then over here we just talk a little bit about the benefits and limitations. So it could be a little bit unethical. So for example, I think of like a cancer study. Maybe it would probably be pretty unethical to take some people who have cancer and to give half of them medicine and half of them not, and then to decide making so it would be unethical to give one group treatment and one group not, for example. Also, it's difficult to implement, and students also may behave differently if they know they're being observed, so there could be some sort of mental factor there. Observational is a little more convenient than experimental, but it's also difficult to avoid bias. So if I'm recording observations about a teacher, for example, it's difficult for me to not be biased maybe towards different things. It's really hard to write down observations that are really unbiased. And then in a survey, it's very convenient to administer. However, unbiased questions are difficult to write. So it's really difficult to write questions that are not biased or that don't lead people to answer a certain way. Okay? And then lastly, consciously or unconsciously, subjects may not tell the truth. So you always have that factor of they're taking the survey. How do you know for sure that really they're answering in a truthful way? So go ahead and pause the video and get all of this kind of copied down onto your note sheet. And then once you've got that done, I'll go over to the before class question. So before class, I want you to write a little bit about this. Brandon surveyed some students and found that the average amount of sleep for female students was much higher than that for male students. Later, a thorough follow-up study concluded that the average amount of sleep was the same for males and females. Give some possible reasons for the discrepancy in the results, and how could Brandon design a better survey? All right, so that's your task before you come to class.